A masterpiece killed by Star Wars, a film that literally bankrupted its studio, a love story so controversial, critics called it sick. These weren't just flops, they were legendary 70s disasters that are now considered masterpieces. These are the stories of the greatest films Hollywood left for dead. The film that truly captured the death of swinging 60s London was Performance. Its premise, a violent gangster, played by James Fox, hides out in the bohemian home of a reclusive rock star, Mick Jagger, leading to a psychedelic meltdown of identity. Warner Brothers executives were horrified. Expecting a British gangster picture, they instead got an experimental art house head trip. The studio shelved it for 2 years, and when it finally limped into theaters, it tanked. For 1970 audiences, it was too weird, too violent, too sexually ambiguous, a psychedelic autopsy of a decade that had just ended. But its influence was seismic. Co-directed by Donald Cammell and British visionary Nicholas Roeg, Performance shattered conventions. Its fractured editing and psychological intensity pushed cinema into uncharted territory, leaving a permanent mark on the language of film. A cinematic trip in every sense. It captures the dark, decadent end of the swinging 60s like nothing else. Everyone thinks of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as a beloved family movie. But the original was a strange, menacing musical that confused children and disturbed their parents. The first sign of trouble came from the book's author, the legendary British writer Roald Dahl. He publicly disowned the film, furious over everything from the casting of Gene Wilder to the musical numbers. His rejection was a major red flag. The marketing was a mess, and for Paramount, it was a commercial disappointment, barely scraping past its $3 million budget. Its bizarre, sometimes genuinely unsettling tone failed to connect with the family audience it was meant for. But television changed everything. Years of constant rotation gave the film a second life, turning it into a cult classic not in theaters, but in living rooms. It proved that family entertainment could be strange, psychologically layered, even a little dangerous. Gene Wilder's iconic, unhinged performance is pure lightning in a bottle. The original remains the subversive classic. Imagine the pitch for Harold and Maude. A death-obsessed young man falls for an 80-year-old woman. In 1971, that premise wasn't just quirky, it was career suicide. Critics were appalled. Variety famously savaged it with the line, "as funny as a burning orphanage." The taboo romance and morbid humor pushed it so far outside the mainstream that audiences stayed away. At the box office, it bombed hard. The film didn't turn a single dollar of profit until 1983, 12 years later. Its second life grew slowly, nurtured in repertory theaters and on college campuses, where it became an anthem for outsiders and nonconformists. That Cat Stevens soundtrack became inseparable from its identity. Hal Ashby's film quietly set the template for the modern indie dramedy, showing how a flop could transform into a generational statement, decades ahead of its time. The rare cult film that feels more relevant with every passing year. A studio wanted another Easy Rider. Instead, they got Two-Lane Blacktop, an existential road movie with almost no plot, starring musicians James Taylor and Dennis Wilson. Studio head Lew Wasserman famously despised the final cut. Made for about $850,000, Universal quietly dumped it into theaters, where it disappeared without a trace. Marketed as a hot rod action flick, what Monte Hellman actually delivered was a hushed meditation on alienation. Where Easy Rider was a loud, romantic statement on the counterculture, this was a minimalist poem. Barely any dialogue, no real payoff, just raw atmosphere. It was destined to fail commercially, but its purity made it endure. Preserved in the National Film Registry, Two-Lane Blacktop now stands as one of the greatest road movies ever filmed. The anti-blockbuster. You watch it for its mood, its authenticity, and Warren Oates at his brilliant manic best. The central question of Nicholas Roeg's 1971 masterpiece Walkabout is what happens when two British schoolchildren are abandoned in the Australian outback and saved by an Aboriginal boy on his spiritual journey. Less a story, more a cinematic poem. It was a critical sensation at Cannes, but commercially it was dead on arrival. Released in scattered fashion, the box office was practically non-existent. Pure cinematic art is hard to sell, and Walkabout was exactly that. Meditative pacing, minimal dialogue, frank nudity. It was too quiet, too strange, too beautiful for mainstream theaters of the day. But its legacy is vast. Rogue became a central voice in the Australian New Wave, and the film's elliptical storytelling reshaped how directors thought about imagery versus plot. A visually transcendent and haunting meditation on the clash between civilization and the natural world. Unforgettable. There's a reason The Friends of Eddie Coyle is considered the most authentic Boston crime film ever made. With Robert Mitchum giving one of his finest, most world-weary performances, it plays with the grit and weight of a documentary. That realism came straight from the source. The dialogue wasn't dreamed up by slick Hollywood writers. It was lifted from the novel by George Higgins, a Boston prosecutor who spent years listening to real informants and low-level crooks. But that authenticity sealed its commercial fate. Released in a year of stylish crime pictures, this story offered no heroes, no glamour, just aging men, broken loyalties, and everyone waiting to sell each other out. It never made back its $3 million budget, and yet its influence runs deep. Eddie Coyle became the foundation for street-level crime realism, a blueprint that films like The Departed and The Town are still building on. This is the real deal. The grim, cynical prototype for every serious crime procedural that followed. After the studio butchered Pat Garrett, Sam Peckinpah struck back. He poured all his rage and disillusionment into his purest, grimiest, most personal film, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. This was the one movie Peckinpah swore was completely his, untouched by any studio. A film drenched in sweat and tequila, unrelentingly brutal, and carried by a ferocious, career-defining turn from Warren Oates. That raw authenticity made it the exact opposite of a commercial prospect. Critics tore it apart, and audiences recoiled from its nihilistic vision. Pure, uncut Peckinpah, exactly what no one wanted to buy a ticket for in 1974. Even on a tight budget, it was a commercial dead end, dismissed as career suicide that scarred his reputation in Hollywood. A grimy, sweat-soaked masterpiece. Not for the faint of heart, but essential to understanding one of cinema's great madmen. The production of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid was a flat-out war zone. The battle left Sam Peckinpah with his elegy for the Old West, a film ripped from his hands, butchered by the studio, and left for dead on release. What MGM threw into theaters was both a commercial flop and a critical punching bag. The suits wanted a straightforward Western. Peckinpah gave them a mournful poem about the death of legends, so they dragged it into the editing room and hacked it apart. That act of sabotage is the origin story of what came next. The reason he fled to Mexico to unleash his pure, unfiltered howl of despair, Alfredo Garcia. For years, all that survived was the ghost of Bob Dylan's iconic soundtrack. Only when the director's cut was finally restored did the buried masterpiece emerge. Seek out the director's cut, a beautiful, bloody poem about the death of an era. Just a few years after stranding 2 children in the Australian outback in Walkabout, Nicholas Roeg pushed his obsession with alienation to the limit. For his next film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, he cast the one figure who already seemed not of this world, David Bowie. In the UK, it did respectable business. But in America, distributors panicked at Roeg's elliptical style and cut 20 minutes from the film. The hacked version was a disjointed mess that baffled audiences and gutted its box office. Like Walkabout, it was too strange, too melancholic, too unclassifiable to sell. Its reputation was rebuilt slowly on the midnight movie circuit, where it became a cornerstone of cult cinema and the definitive showcase for Bowie's alien presence on screen. A haunting sci-fi masterpiece. Proof that sometimes the most alien choice is the only one that makes sense. A young John Carpenter took the skeleton of a Howard Hawks Western, fused it with the urban dread of the 70s, and with assault on Precinct 13, crafted a stone-cold classic on a shoestring budget. In the US, it was a total non-performer. Made for a tiny $100,000, it was dumped into theaters with poor distribution and met with audience indifference. Critics didn't get it, and one scene, the shocking murder of a little girl at an ice cream truck, was too much for mainstream viewers. The film vanished. Then it hit the London Film Festival. European audiences recognized it immediately, a masterclass in low-budget, high-tension filmmaking. Their praise forced American critics to take a second look, cementing Carpenter's legacy. The siege narrative and iconic synth score became his signature, the blueprint for everything that followed. Pure, distilled Carpenter, a lean, mean, relentlessly cool piece of genre filmmaking. Fresh off The Exorcist, William Friedkin burned every ounce of his Hollywood capital on a nihilistic jungle thriller about driving trucks loaded with nitroglycerin, his 1977 masterpiece, Sorcerer. The numbers say it all. A budget that ballooned to $22 million against a worldwide gross of just $9 million. For Universal and Paramount, it was a financial sinkhole. The timing was brutal, opening 1 month after Star Wars had changed everything. Audiences wanted space battles and fantasy. Friedkin gave them a sweat-soaked, methodical nightmare with no heroes and zero hope. His brilliant remake of the French classic The Wages of Fear was vaporized by a new blockbuster era. The failure marked the end of New Hollywood's blank check era, a monument to cinematic obsession, an absolute masterclass in tension. You watch it to see a director risk everything, on screen and off. How do you shoot the iconic interior scenes of a period drama purely by candlelight? If you're Stanley Kubrick making Barry Lyndon, you don't compromise. You find a solution. Zeiss lenses built for NASA to photograph the dark side of the moon. That obsession defined the production. The result, a film many saw as a coldly beautiful marvel, but a commercial non-starter. 3 hours of formal perfection dropped into the age of the blockbuster. For Warner Brothers, the $11 million picture was a financial disappointment. Audiences found it distant, slow, and impenetrable. Kubrick wasn't making a product for 1975, he was creating a permanent addition to cinematic language. Barry Lyndon became the benchmark for composition and natural lighting, setting a new standard for cinematography still studied today. The most beautiful failure in cinema history. A film whose technical perfection is the entire point. In the middle of editing The Godfather Part 2, Francis Ford Coppola released a paranoid, deeply personal thriller many consider his finest work. A movie built on audio surveillance, The Conversation. With Gene Hackman fresh off his Oscar win, it seemed like a guaranteed hit. It wasn't. Paramount expected a blockbuster and got a commercial headache. The $1.6 million picture barely recouped its budget. A demanding, methodical study of paranoia that refused to let audiences off the hook. In the midst of Watergate, moviegoers wanted escape, not reflection. History delivered its cruelest twist. Nominated for Best Picture, it lost to Coppola's other 1974 film, The Godfather Part 2. Over time, The Conversation quietly became a masterpiece, its reputation growing as the world it depicted became our reality. The greatest film ever overshadowed by its own director. A claustrophobic masterpiece. There is one film whose very name is synonymous with disaster. Heaven's Gate. It isn't just a box office bomb, it's the benchmark for disaster. The movie that bankrupted a legendary studio, killed the 70s director as king era, and became the very definition of a production catastrophe. The financials are staggering. What began as an $11.6 million budget ballooned to $44 million. After a poisonous critical reception, it scraped in less than $3.5 million, wiping out United Artists. Michael Cimino's pursuit of perfection turned mythic, wasteful reshoots, endless takes, and a 5.5-hour cut that critics tore to shreds. This wasn't a hidden gem waiting for rediscovery. It was a public spectacle, a disaster everyone could point to. And yet, time has changed the verdict. Not a simple flop, but a flawed, ambitious masterpiece. A reclaimed epic that stands as a historical marker. The exact moment the studios took the keys back from the auteurs. The most important failure in movie history. You watch it to see the spectacular, terrifying end of an era. Did I miss a legendary disaster? Drop your pick in the comments below, and subscribe to VintageVerse so you never miss another story.